Finance Committee will come to order. This morning, the Finance Committee is joined by IRS Commissioner Rettig for our annual hearing that typically marks the end of tax filing season. However, 2021 is no typical year. There's lots to talk about, and I'm going to start with the tax gap, the difference between taxes owed and what's collected. Even the most conservative estimates of the annual tax gap put it in the hundreds of billions of dollars a year. My own view is the annual tax gap is at least double the official estimate and growing. The most recent official estimate pegs the tax gap at $381 billion a year, but it looks all the way back to data from 2011 through 2013. That means these estimates are out of date as soon as released. The fact is our economy has changed and expanded. In 2011, one Bitcoin didn't buy you a ham sandwich. Today's cryptocurrencies and other technologies create huge new opportunities for the tax cheats to rip off the American people. More and more wealth is building up in the hands of the fortunate few and big corporations. They're the ones with the high-priced lawyers and accountants who specialize in concealing income with sketchy bookkeeping, money laundering, and shell companies. I'm coming off 10 town hall meetings in Oregon. When I hold those meetings, especially during tax season, lots of Oregon taxpayers tell me they have a gut feeling they're being cheated. They hear about the massive tax gap and they're rightfully ticked off. Close even a portion of the tax gap and you're better able to fund care for the elderly at home, assistance to needy kids, and affordable housing. The IRS needs more resources to tackle the challenge, but it is only just beginning to recover from a decade of Republican budget cuts. Those cuts hobbled our ability to root out cheating by high flyers and their high-priced accountants. Criminal tax evasion cases have fallen nearly by half. The number of IRS tax enforcement, the experts who know how to break down the tax evasion cases, has now fallen by nearly a third. Wealthy tax cheats have proven that with enough attack dog lawyering, they can litigate the IRS into submission and rip off working taxpayers for big money. Meanwhile, the burden of tax audits was shifted unfairly to working people. That's because it's a lot cheaper and easier to hassle a working mom over a tax credit overpayment than it is to decipher the latest money laundering schemes. My bottom line, it's time to throw out business as usual on this. Business as usual has proven to be a rainmaker for cheaters and criminals and unfair to everybody else. The IRS needs more highly skilled investigators and better technology to keep up with the modern crooks. The Biden administration's new budget proposal calls for a 10% increase in IRS funding. That's a good start. I believe there's room for a more comprehensive strategy that'll lower the tax gap. The committee is going to kick off a new policy this morning. On my watch, the annual filing session from this point on will put a special focus on what the IRS has done over the previous year to catch the cheats and close the gap. There's a lot of catching up to do. Let me wrap up with just a couple of other comments. First, Commissioner, I'm going to give you a formal introduction, but we want to thank you and the staff for working many, many long hours during the pandemic to get 3 rounds of relief payments to the public. Millions of hurting families got desperately needed relief payments, and our country got an economic boost. The committee, the Finance Committee, also led an important effort to make sure that Americans who got unemployment benefits did not get a painful tax surprise this year. Finally, Commissioner, we're going to want to hear about getting the new child tax credit payments up and running. It's a big job, and millions of Americans are counting on the IRS to get it done. Commissioner will give you a formal introduction after we hear from Senator Crapo. Thank you for joining us, Senator Crapo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Commissioner. I appreciated our phone call the other day. The past 12 months have brought unprecedented challenges, not only for the American people, but also for the Internal Revenue Service. In addition to its role as our nation's tax collector, Congress has recently given the IRS an expanded mission and a central role in delivering our economic recovery. So far, this has included distributing 3 rounds of over $150 million economic impacts payments and implementing a variety of temporary tax incentives to keep employees on payroll, guarantee paid leave for employees who contract COVID-19, and help taxpayers bridge the gap through the pandemic. Soon, it will also include the distribution of millions of advance payments of the child tax credit in a temporary policy that vastly changes the scope and mission of the IRS. Commissioner Reddick, I commend you and your staff for your diligent efforts to balance all of these competing priorities. At the same time, given how much is at stake for our economy and the American people, it's critical that we get it right. Filing season and economic impact payment issues are the most frequent topics I hear about from Idahoans. I'm extremely concerned about the reports of a backlog of millions of tax returns from last year's filing season that have not yet been processed. This means that millions of taxpayers are having to wait longer to receive their refund in the middle of a pandemic. Further, IRS call center wait times remain unacceptably long, and many taxpayers have been sent confusing automated notices indicating that they have not yet filed their return, when in fact it was filed but has not yet been processed by the IRS. Confusion has also been generated because of the massive fraud in unemployment compensation programs. State workforce agencies have been taxed because the federal government tells victims of identity theft who have federal tax issues to figure it out with state agencies. Meanwhile, in the midst of filing season, a brand new waiver of federal taxes on unemployment compensation was passed into law, causing yet more confusion for filers. Today, you have the opportunity to explain how the IRS plans to remedy taxpayer confusion and tackle the backlog of prior year returns without falling further behind, a formidable task. I also have a number of concerns about the implementation of the Child Tax Credit Advanced Payment Programs. Former Finance Committee Chairman Grassley and I sent you a letter a few months ago requesting reasonable information about the timeline of implementation, the cost of implementation, and how the IRS plans to tackle fraud and other risks associated with the administration of this new program. What we received from your staff was untimely and unresponsive. Today is an opportunity for a real conversation about the timeline that the IRS envisions for getting the online portal up and running and issuing the first advance CTC payments. The IRS must assure us that this implementation will not mean putting the filing season on the back burner, nor rushing to get payments out before we have accurate information from taxpayers regarding eligibility. To date, absent any contrary indication from the IRS, I'm left with the impression that the aggressive July 1 payment deadline imposed by congressional Democrats will be challenging to meet by an IRS staff that is already stretched thin, without cutting corners or reassigning staff who should be focused on processing tax returns. If congressional intent was really to get these advance payments out at all costs as soon as possible, then the logical approach would have been to simply provide an extra bonus in the economic impact payment of each qualifying low-income child. Congress could have put those increased payments in the hands of those parents a month ago with that approach. Instead, the legislation created a complicated new program for these periodic advance payments with a clearly stated goal of making this temporary program permanent. With that in mind, fully setting up the required online portal and equivalent secure mechanisms for those without internet access in order to ensure that any advance payments issued are both accurate and desired by parents must be considered at least as much of a controlling priority as the requirement to begin issuing advance payments this summer. Finally, we are now approaching 2 years since Congress passed the Taxpayer First Act, an important bipartisan measure that will enhance taxpayer protections, modernize the IRS's organizational structure, and improve its customer service and information technology. Commissioner Reddick, I look forward to hearing an update today on the IRS's efforts to implement these reforms and usher forth a 21st century IRS. Thank you again for appearing before us today and for your tireless efforts on behalf of our taxpayers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Crapo. Our witness today is Charles P. Reddick, the 49th Commissioner of the IRS. Previously, he was a highly respected law firm partner for 36 years. He's represented thousands of individuals, businesses, and corporate taxpayers before the IRS, the Department of Justice Tax Division, federal and state courts, and state taxing authorities. Mr. Reddick has served as a past chair and member of the IRS Advisory Council. He also served as chair of the taxation section of the State Bar of California and has served on the advisory boards of both the Franchise Tax Board and the Board of Equalization in his home state of California. He has a BA in economics from the University of California in Los Angeles, as well as a JD with honors from Pepperdine College and an LLM taxation from New York University. Welcome. Please proceed, Mr. Commissioner.
Chairman Wyden, Ranking Member Crapo, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the current filing season and our efforts to help taxpayers during the COVID-19 pandemic. Before I begin, I want to thank Congress and each of the members of this committee and each of your staff for working with us during drafting of the recently enacted stimulus packages. The ability to administer legislation passed by Congress is almost as important as the content of the legislation that's passed. We also thank you for providing the IRS with resources to enable us to implement the tax-related portions of such important legislation. It will take time for the IRS to overcome the challenges of the past decade, and the agency will continue to struggle to replace workers lost through attrition and to expand our workforce and support implementation of our multi-year integrated business modernization plan as designed. We will continue enhancing meaningful service and compliance efforts on behalf of every American. With respect to the COVID response, our response illustrates the importance of every American to the IRS and the importance of the IRS to every American. IRS employees worked hard since mid-March of last year to implement the major provisions of the CARES Act, the COVID Tax Relief Act, and more recently, the American Recovery Plan to deliver 3 rounds of economic impact payments to deliver filing season 20 and filing season 21 to help millions and millions of Americans during a pandemic. In a bit more than 12 months, IRS and Treasury employees delivered the first round of EIP-1 totaling almost $275 billion. They issued refunds during filing season 20 of over $320 billion. We issued EIP-2 of over $142 billion. We are in process with respect to EIP-3, and to date, we have delivered another $372 billion. And with respect to filing season 21, to date, we have issued over 62 million refunds totaling more than $180 billion. In a bit more than 12 months, the IRS has been instrumental in delivering almost $1.3 trillion to individuals in our country, and we are proud to have had the opportunity and the privilege to do so. I want to emphasize and recognize the amount of advanced preparation of our employees to achieve such quick turnarounds. I believe the committee is aware of the fact that the first EIP-1 payments went out within 2 weeks, EIP-2 payments went out within 2 days, and the first round of EIP-3 payments were issued in less than 24 hours after the date of enactment. This is a tribute to the quality, dedication, and caliber of the employees that we have. We care, and we know the importance of our role. It is also a call for consistent, timely, adequate, multi-year funding to support our business systems modernization. It should not be implied our ability to deliver quickly, promptly, and mostly accurately. And I do understand and we accept that we did not get it perfect, but we did try our best. But the ability to do so should not translate into the fact that we do not need a modernized system. Our systems are built on the legacy systems of the IRS, and we need to replace our legacy systems to have the IRS in a position to move forward effectively when called upon to do so and when as part of our normal daily operations. Turning to tax season 21, filing season 21, it continues to go smoothly. We've received at peak 335 submissions per second. We have received more than 93 million individual returns, and as stated, have issued more than 62 million refunds totaling $180 billion. As you are aware, we also process returns for various states. We also process business returns and other related matters. To date, that category all in, we've received over 206 million federal, state, and business returns, keep in mind, during the pandemic. The late start of the filing season did not impact our ability to issue refunds. The first rounds of refunds, we opened the filing season on February 12th. The first round of refunds to the most needy individuals, EITC and ACTC, went out on February 16 and February 18. As you are aware, we recently issued Notice 21-21, extending the current filing season to May 17. That extension was not based upon any operational challenges of the Internal Revenue Service. The Internal Revenue Service is operating smoothly with respect to filing season. With respect to the unemployment insurance and the exclusion of $10,200 per individual, the IRS announced that we will, in IR 2021-71 on March 31, that for people who filed their returns, we will automatically issue the refunds. We will first be doing the refunds. We will adjust the returns. We will first be doing the refunds for single filers, followed by married filers. Taxpayers do not need to file amended returns to claim the exclusion with respect to their unemployment insurance if they previously reported it. And we expect to be issuing the refunds in May. Turning to level of service, this has been a challenging year. As you are aware, we had a congressional mailbox. The input and intake for each of you was challenging, but keep in mind that our level of service is an appropriated budget item, which was determined before there was a pandemic, before there was an EIP1, before there was an EIP2, before there was an EIP3. Our call volumes have more than doubled. We've received at peak more than 1,500 calls per second. We've received 1.1 billion visits to irs.gov. We've had to deploy some of our customer service representatives to FEMA work with respect to hurricanes, wildfires, earthquakes, and the more recent extreme cold weather. During the pandemic, we adjusted to a virtual operation as quickly as we could, but we realized that that was not seamless for the people who had to interact with us, and we greatly appreciate the patience and understanding of others as we tried to operate to the best of our abilities. And I think the foregoing, personally, I'm very appreciative of the efforts of our employees and people generally, and I'm not going to call out our people separate. I know everybody had a difficult time, but I asked a tremendous amount of every employee of the Internal Revenue Service. We got the best of the best. They stepped in, they were creative, they were innovative. They came up with plans in a hurry to allow us to do as well as we did. The success and strength of the Internal Revenue Service is the employees of the Internal Revenue Service. Chairman Wyden, Ranking Member Crapo, and members of the committee, this concludes my statement, and I would be happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And again, we very much appreciate all the efforts to get those checks out during the pandemic. And now we're going to look to the future. And Oregonians come up to me at home and they say, Ron, what is the deal with the taxes that the big guys owe and don't get collected? And then they tell you they pay taxes with every paycheck, lots of them, and they want to know what is being done to collect from the cheaters. And I went through the estimates, which seem like they're from the dark ages, a decade ago. And I've been digging into this, and I've come to the conclusion that the tax gap is, in fact, far greater than has been officially reported. So what I would like to start with, Commissioner, is what is your personal opinion about how big the annual tax gap actually is?
The published tax gap estimate of the Internal Revenue Service, the current one that's out, and we'll be issuing one next year, but the published tax gap estimate is for tax years 2011 to 2013, has a gross tax gap of $441 billion. As you indicated, Mr. Chair, in 2011, folks were generally unaware of the term cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, and all. There's more than 8,600 cryptocurrencies, virtual currencies, in the marketplace, and the market cap worldwide for cryptocurrencies is almost $2 trillion. Our tax gap map for 2011 to 2013 is based on information that is from 2011 to 2013. It does not include any focus with respect to virtual currencies, which I indicated now is about a $2 trillion market cap. It does not include much information with respect to foreign source income. It does not include information with respect to illegal source income, which is still taxable and we do chase. And it also, more recently, within the last 2 weeks, there was a report published that included 2 IRS researchers from our RAS organization that indicated that the top 1% of all taxpayers by high income account for as much as an additional $175 billion in the tax gap computations, and that's associated with their look at only 2 issues, which were pass-through entities and offshore income associated with the top 1%. If you aggregate the points that I'm talking about and you look at the fact that there's a current estimate by folks on the outside that the tax gap is $7.5 trillion over the next 10 years, and you add in the component pieces that I've referenced, there are more. I've just referenced the ones that are most highly visible at this point. If you add those in, I think it would not be outlandish to believe that the actual tax gap could approach and possibly exceed $1 trillion per year.
Thank you, and that is something that we very much want to focus on this committee. We think we can do it in a bipartisan way. $1 trillion tax gap, and that is very much in line with our analysis, reflects the amount that is owed, and we aren't collecting from cheaters. So I very much appreciate your clarifying that. What would the IRS do with an increase in funds for enforcement to better be able to collect that $1 trillion annual tax gap? And what would the rate of return be on those kinds of efforts?
We need to approach the tax gap and have a meaningful reduction in the tax gap. We need a multifaceted approach. So you've asked with respect to enforcement. Our figures with respect to if we received $1 billion for enforcement, we could bring on board 4,875 frontline enforcement personnel, which also includes the component parts for taxpayer advocate service, appeals, counsel, and whatnot. It's our package, if you will, to go down that road. We would also need to use some of those funds to modernize our systems. We are today able to identify evidence of tax fraud and signatures of tax fraud, if you will, and tax evasion that even 2 years ago we could not identify, but it's an example of we're heading in the right direction. We need to get there ahead of time. We are up against more sophisticated elements in the community, practitioners and others, and the tools that they're using. So essentially, the key priorities would be to modernize our system, onboard enforcement personnel. Realistically, we're down 17,000 enforcement personnel over the last decade. So to replenish that, we could not do that in 1 year. We could not absorb that. We have about 50 to 55,000.
I'm almost out of time, Commissioner.
I'm sorry.
Do you need, in addition to the financial resources, any changes in either regulations or the statutes to be able to more aggressively go after the tax cheats?
We do. We need information reporting almost across all lanes. The statistics are that when there's substantial information reporting and withholding, that about 99% of those income items get reported. Without information reporting, it fluctuates down around 45%. Electronic filing of most returns and most systems would obviously enhance our ability to take a look and focus our resources in the appropriate areas. And there's, correctable error authority, return preparer regulation. It's as I said, it's a multifaceted approach. And nobody should discount the desire of any employee of the IRS to get there. We want to get there, but we do need your help.
Good, and I'm going to do everything I can to make this a bipartisan effort. Senator Crapo.
Thank you very much, Senator Wyden. Commissioner, excuse me, Commissioner Reddick, I want to follow up on Senator Wyden's questions for just a minute. First of all, I completely agree that if there are those who are cheating on their taxes and causing us to have such a large tax gap, which I don't doubt, we should address that. We often see many allegations that there are corporations who pay no income taxes for one reason or the other. In fact, the reasons are not given. And I'm not quite sure I understand why. But one response that has been given back to me when I try to check that out is that many corporations are being accused of using legal provisions in the tax code, such as the R&D tax credit or other tax credits and deductions and options that they can in order to manage their tax liabilities. As you calculate these numbers you just talked to us about involving the tax gap, you are not counting the utilization of legal provisions in the tax code like the R&D tax credit and so forth. Is that correct?
Definitely not. There's no part of the tax gap should include legal transactions that are authorized by the code and courts and whatnot.
Yeah, the reason I ask that question is because often in the political discussion of this, what we see in the media at least, is this notion that there are so-called loopholes that taxpayers are taking advantage of. And to me, I wonder what those loopholes are. If they are legal provisions in the code, we ought to know that and determine whether they are, in fact, some valid tax credit that we want to continue to allow, or whether they are some unjustified tax policy. But that's a whole different discussion than the tax gap, correct?
Correct.
Okay, that's a discussion I think we should engage in as well, Senator Wyden. I'm going to conclude with the questions that I referred to when we were on the telephone the other day with regard to the CTC advance payment provisions. The first is the experience with the 2017 tax reform law showed that many American taxpayers have an ongoing expectation of receiving a sizable refund. And when given the option to get that refund earlier, many households opt to take the refund when they file their taxes because they choose to get it in that fashion. Based on that experience, has the IRS estimated what percentage of eligible CTC recipients it might expect to opt out of receiving advance payments?
We don't currently have that information, but you are accurate. That is the information that we're getting, is that that's for many people.
Individuals and families don't have access to the internet. And that makes it very difficult for them to use a portal to update their status or opt out of receiving advance payments. Can you address how the IRS intends to reach such filers to ensure that they have the same opportunities for access to the portal?
If people do not have broadband, and there's tens of millions of people in this country that do not have access or are not comfortable with it, they'll end up needing to deal with us either through paper sources, U.S. mail, or visiting an IRS office, which certainly is not ideal if they're adjusting. And the portal is statutorily required, and it's there for people to identify changed circumstances and also to opt out. And so we will make forms and instructions for the forms available for folks who want to opt out in avenues other than the portal.
And when do you project that both the secure online portal and the equivalent non-electronic processes will be fully operational?
We will launch the portal for CTC by July 1, which is the statutory mandated date. And we have already put our teams together and our working groups together, and we're looking at communication strategies and all the rest. We will launch by July 1 with the absolute best product we are able to put together. We might need to adjust that. We did that with respect to the EIP online portals we would monitor, and we may need to adjust that, but we are trying to get it as user-friendly as possible, but we will launch by July 1.
Well, thank you. And clearly, a number of important steps have to be taken to achieve that. As such, can you assure us that the IRS will not issue advanced CTC payments until the online portal and its secure non-electronic counterpart process are fully operational, and that all potentially eligible taxpayers have been given the full opportunity to update their status and information and to opt out of receiving any advance payments if they choose to?
We will do so. We will follow the statute, and the statute requires us to do so by July 1. If we are not prepared, and I indicated to another congressional committee a few months back, if we are not prepared, we will not launch. We're not going to risk our systems. We're not going to open our systems up to, as you would hope, to possible fraudsters and the rest, and to a series of errors. We will test, retest, and get it right before we launch. And we're not married. The statute requires July 1, but if we're not ready July 1, and we'll tell you if that turns out, as of now, we will launch July 1, but we will not risk our system.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Crapo. Senator Cantwell is next. Senator Grassley is after Senator Cantwell.
You're waiting for Cantwell? I'm sorry, I didn't.
No, thank you for the courtesy. I believe Senator Cantwell.
Ready to go.
Hold off for 1 second, if you would, Senator Grassley.
Yeah, I will.
Oh, yes. Let's go ahead with you, Senator Grassley.
Okay.
Thank you.
The American Rescue Plan included major temporary modifications of the child tax credit, including making the credit fully refundable and advanceable. I have concerns that these changes will drastically expand the IRS role into being kind of social welfare oriented at the expense of its primary mission of tax collector. As Aaron Collins, the National Taxpayer Advocate, said, quote, "The challenge is the IRS was not set up for that purpose, and their IT is not structured for that," end of quote. It's clear that setting up periodic advance payment and associated infrastructure will be a significant undertaking for your agency. In addition to the dollar cost of this program, can you expand upon the amount of work, hours, and the number of personnel it is estimated it will take to set up and administer what's now a temporary program?
The budget to implement the CTC program, and we have to create an entire new structure for the Internal Revenue Service. We are not historically a benefits delivery federal agency, but we're setting that up. The cost for that program is $391 million. Right now, it'll be somewhere, and this is my guess, but it's an educated guess, minimum of 300 to 500 people, which includes folks that will have to handle the phone service, because we'll have increased phone service. We'll get taxpayer advocate service. We'll get additional touch points. Criminal investigation, to the extent fraudsters try to come into the system, we'll need additional resources there. So it's pretty widespread. What we've done to date, and the IRS, and again, I thank Congress for this, we were part of getting the July 1 date as opposed to an earlier date, and that's very meaningful to the Internal Revenue Service because, as you know, we have filing season, normally April 15. We moved it to May 17. But we also have the third round of economic impact payments. It would have been extremely difficult for the IRS to launch a CTC program at any time before July 1. It's a challenge to do it July 1, but it would have been really difficult. So what we're in process now, and you have asked as well for additional information, and we will continue to update you and update members of the committee. But what we've done now is put together our working groups to figure out the points, such as what you're asking. Who do we need? Where do we need? What are the requirements to launch this portal? So we have working groups with respect to guidance and policy changes. We have working groups with respect to chief counsel on what we're able to do and what we're not able to do within the scope of the law and outside the scope of the law. We have working groups in IT working with respect to the authentication levels. As you can imagine, every time, this is a risk-averse agency, every time we open some system up, it becomes a risk issue for the agency, and we're not going to allow undue risk.
I think you've satisfied me for now.
Okay, I'll follow up with you.
Said you'd give updates on
All right,
that.
yep.
So I'm also concerned about the advanced child tax credit program might have a possibility of fraud. According to Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration, in 2019, the improper payment rate in the program exceeded 15% or $7.2 billion. The IRS's experience with the advanceable premium tax credit, which TIJA estimated has an improper payment rate of 27%, suggests a proposal to make the child tax credit advanceable could result in billions more of improper payments. How would you expect the advanceability of the child tax credit to affect improper payment rates currently associated with the credit?
Opening up the system and having people have the ability to modify their circumstances monthly is another element of risk that the IRS is required to assume under the statute. And so I can't quantify it yet because we're not there, but there's definitely a risk there. I will say that our criminal investigation division is best in class, and they are engaged with us with respect to the planning on this. And, you know, we'll work from a deterrence perspective, but we'll also chase those who come in unlawfully.
Okay. Then my last question will have to be this. The current IRS private debt collection program was established in 2015 on a bipartisan basis to collect tax debts that are due but not currently being worked by the IRS. The program has proven its ability to collect hundreds of millions of dollars in otherwise uncollectible tax debt on an annual basis, including generating nearly $500 million in net revenue in 2020. However, I was recently informed that the contractors in the program were told IRS decided to delay the delivery of the new cases until the end of September. Do you agree this program has allowed tax debts to be collected that otherwise would not have been? And can you assure me that the program will continue to be operated on a full extent required under law? And the reason for the question, and I'll quickly stop, is that, you know, the program was put on hold by the previous Obama administration, now operating, bringing in money, and I hope that doesn't happen again.
I have about 18 months left in my term as commissioner. I'm a believer in the private debt collection. The private debt collectors, we have a high degree of oversight with respect to the companies that are doing this. There's three companies. They have a 600,000 case backload at present. We're providing 1,000 to 1,500 updates to them, addresses and evidence of activity for folks that they have to collect. And overall, I think it's worked well. We do work with them so that they don't overly breach. There are a lot of rules in the country generally, and also with respect to tax collection. And so we watch all of that, and we have teams that do that.
Thank you, Senator Grassley. Our next questioner will be Senator Menendez on the web.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, I appreciate the work that you and all of those public employees at the IRS have done incredible work despite having their funding undermined for years by congressional Republicans. The IRS budget shrunk by 20%, resulting in 20% of its workforce being laid off over the last 10 years. Now, middle-class families and small businesses bear the brunt of the IRS customer service problems. Wealthy individuals and large corporations are all too happy to take advantage of the IRS limitations. Indeed, according to a recent study by the National Bureau of Economic Research, the top 1% of households don't report nearly 21% of their income. Overall, some experts estimate that the agency has missed out on $630 billion in tax revenue in just 2020 alone. Now, I certainly don't blame you for the tax gap. That problem is rooted in the chronic underfunding of a budget for a decade. It's estimated that for every dollar invested in the IRS, the agency brings back $7 to our Treasury. So, Commissioner, would the agency be able to better pursue corporations and high-income earners that are cheating the tax system if the agency's budget was increased?
The IRS absolutely needs more resources across all lanes of the Internal Revenue Service. And, we do get outgunned. I mean, there's no other way to say it. We are using our resources. I'm confident, and I can assure you, we're using our resources to the absolute best of our ability. It is not a dedication or a people issue. It's a numbers issue. We have about 6,500 frontline revenue agents who handle the most complex, sophisticated individual and corporate matters. Substantially every one of them are dedicated to either high-income individuals, the most egregious cases, or the largest corporations.
So, and then it is a resource problem. Who pays the price of tax evasion by the very wealthy and large corporations?
Well, ultimately, you know, if people aren't paying their fair share, it's borne by the other people who are paying their fair share.
Mike.
Yeah, and that's overwhelmingly middle class and working families. I certainly believe that we can do better by giving the resources to the agencies so that everybody pays their fair share and there isn't a disproportionate burden. Let me ask you, I included into law a provision that gives immediate relief to those whose student loans have been forgiven during the pandemic through 2025. Do you think that most borrowers who had their student loans forgiven would be aware that their debt relief would be considered taxable income if it were for the Student Loan Tax Relief Act?
Hit and miss, probably. You know, if you were asking me a percentage, maybe 30 or 40%. You know, I know a lot of folks who are on those programs, went to professional schools and whatnot. You know, from my time on the outside, and many people are not aware that debt forgiveness is a taxable item to them. But you know, I would speculate 30 or 40%. I really can't identify it, but certainly many are not aware.
And finally, yeah, I agree with you. Many are not, and we have seen cases in which individuals had debt relief and they got a $7,000 tax bill. So I'm glad we were able to get this provision into law to create the relief from that being a taxable event. Our colleagues on the committee, Chairman Wyden and Senator Brown and Bennett and others have been very active and got CTC provisions of the American Rescue Plan that is a historic enhancement which can cut child poverty in half. Commissioner, could you provide us with an update on the progress you are making on implementing the expanded and enhanced child tax credit and where your agency is on providing in terms of recurring advance refund payments?
As I indicated to Senator Grassley, we've put together working groups. We've put together working groups within our council, within our IT, within wage and investment to determine the requirements, determine legal abilities, determine our ability to do certain things, what's the most user-friendly path to launching. And we fully anticipate to launch by July 1, which is the statutorily mandated date.
All right, I look forward to seeing that happen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Menendez. Next in the queue, Senator Thune asked that we wait, would be Senator Carper on the web.
Better in person.
Excuse me, in person, and then he will be followed by Senator Portman. I didn't see you, Senator Carper. You're next.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. To our ranking member and my colleagues, good to see you all.
Good morning.
To the Commissioner, last time you were before us that I remember, I think your wife was with us. She's a native of South Vietnam, a place where I served in Southeast Asia and Vietnam War. And we sent her a warm welcome to her. We said, thanks for sharing you with us, especially in these trying times. And for colleagues, they have a son who's in the Army, and he's an Army doc, and I think he's on his way to Fort Benning to go through.
Just promoted to major. We're very proud.
Yeah, tell him we said Navy salutes, Army. We've been talking, colleagues, about the need at the IRS for resources. They include people, they include technology, include money. And we have heard several of my colleagues have said that for every dollar that we provide additional resources to the IRS, the payback to the Treasury is something like $7. And when I was elected to the House of Representatives a million years ago, I think Chuck Grassley had just been elected to the U.S. Senate. And then I think Senator Wyden and I served together for a number of years in the House. And those are years when we measured the federal deficit in terms of tens of billions of dollars a year. Tens of billions of dollars a year. Today we measure a federal deficit in terms of like trillions of dollars a year. Trillions of dollars a year. And when you tell us, and you have, and the President has said this as well in his budget offering, that for every dollar in additional resource we provide to the IRS, we get an extra $6 or $7 in revenue to the Treasury. We need every buck that we can bring into the Treasury. The thing that we lose track of a little bit is in addition to providing, reducing this enormous deficit, there is a problem with providing good service. And we make the tax code more complicated every year. And we say to you and the folks who work for you, deal with this, provide good constituent service. How, by providing additional resources, will it actually help us on that side?
The service is a component of the tax gap as well, because the enforcement side supports the taxpayers who comply, and the deterrent effect of enforcement helps keep the honest people more honest. On the service side, the easiest category to identify is what we refer to as level of service, which is our telephone service. We currently have 13,760 folks online answering the phones. Only 3% of them were telework eligible before we went into the pandemic. 100% of them are telework eligible today. And that's not only important for the pandemic, but when we ran into cold weather, we didn't skip a beat. But the easily identifiable number there, when people are looking at our budget, is every 10% increase in level of service. So each 10% out of 10 calls to answer one more globally for the IRS is $100 million. So we want a 30% increase. That would be $300 million. What we got caught in now is the budget. It's appropriated for level of service, and this budget was, as I said earlier, determined pre-pandemic, pre-EIP 1, 2, and 3, and our call volumes have gone up between 2 and 4 times, depending upon the time service. And we have 13,760. Congress did appropriate 1,000 more in the last budget. It takes us 14 weeks to train those folks. They'll be coming on board in the summer.
A question for the record. I talked on the phone about the IRS's free file program, which allows people for free to get help in filing their taxes. And I'm going to ask you to, for the record, provide the response to share your views with us on the future of the free file program, what can be done to make this program more widely used and more effective. The other thing I'm going to ask you to respond for the record. We have 4 committees that have jurisdiction over service transportation legislation. One of those is Environment and Public Works Committee. The others include Banking Committee, which has transit, the Commerce Committee, which has rail and safety, and this committee, whose responsibility is to figure out how to pay for things. The gas and diesel tax in this country has not been raised, I think, since 1993. And they've been stuck at 18 cents per gallon on gasoline, 24 cents a gallon on diesel. Meanwhile, we've seen the shortfall for monies that we provide through the user fees for roads, highways, bridges, and so forth, transit, is now ballooned from to like hundreds of billions of dollars. I'm interested in exploring, for the record, response from the IRS to if the gas and diesel tax were raised maybe about a penny a quarter, starting in the next calendar year. It'll be 4 cents over a year for a number of years. Is there some way to somehow rebate that money, approximately, to families, say, whose income is below median family income, and to use the tax code to do that? I don't expect you to do this on the fly, but I want you to talk with your folks about it. The administration has expressed a reluctance to do anything that affects folks whose income is under $400,000 a year, raising user fees like this. My response is, you mean somebody who's making $300,000 a year shouldn't have to help pay for our roads, highways, bridges? I'm looking for ways that we could possibly use the tax code to rebate to families below a certain income level and make them whole. If you can do that for the record, I'd be most grateful. Thanks so much.
We'll take a look.
I thank my colleague. Senator Portman is next.
Thank you, Chairman Wyden. And Commissioner, really appreciate your being here, and more importantly, for what you and your team have done over the past year. I know it's been a big challenge for you, including the workforce challenges you've had with COVID and people working remotely, and also being asked to do so much by us, including the direct payments and the CTC changes and others. And I appreciate your staying in touch with us. On tax gap, I was intrigued hearing earlier the comments from Chairman Wyden and other members of the committee. I think this is a great opportunity, and it's always been kind of a frustration. You know, how do you get at it? You mentioned more electronic filing. That's happening. That should make it easier. As you know, we exceeded our expectations on that. You also mentioned information reporting to help close it. We're working on a cryptocurrency bill, which would define cryptocurrency for tax purposes and try to provide appropriate reporting rules. Can you give us any specific suggestions on what reporting would be helpful on the cryptocurrency side, and would that help in closing the tax gap?
Absolutely, reporting with respect to cryptocurrencies would be important. I think it's noteworthy if you go back and you look at the 2019 Form 1040. I was instrumental in adding a provision together with Diane Grant, who's here with me today, adding a provision in there, asking a question, did you have transactions in cryptocurrency? That got on because of timing, it got on a schedule further in. But the 2020 Form 1040, right under the address portion, is a cryptocurrency question similar to the FBAR question. It's a yes/no question. So visibility, and we could give you a lot of guidance from what we see with respect to areas in the crypto world. It's replicating itself constantly, and so now we have these non-fungible tokens, which are essentially collectibles in the crypto world. These are not visible items by design. The crypto world is not visible. I will say in the criminal context, the IRS Criminal Investigation Cyber Crimes Unit has been spectacular operating in the dark web, engaging with cryptocurrency-related transactions. So we have a lot of experience there.
Great. We'd like your input on it, get some technical advice. We're working on the bill. It's meant to be bipartisan. It's something where we can help to close the tax gap in that area. Obviously, there's a lot of other issues related to cash businesses. And frankly, going to the issue of modernization, back many years ago when I was working on IRS reform, I remember getting this call from a constituent saying I had to wait on the line for 45 minutes. I'm not gonna keep waiting on the line that long. And here we are again, waiting on the line for 45 minutes. And therefore this individual chose not to file. So part of the modernization efforts that we've been trying to undertake is about closing that gap as well. Do you agree with that? And let me ask you specifically about what happened with the filing season in 2019. We still have people who filed paper returns who haven't heard. And this is tough for them. One is actually a cousin of a tax court judge who happens to live in Ohio, who calls every couple months and says, I got to have my certification from the IRS that I've at least filed my tax return because you can't get a mortgage. In some cases, people are not getting their refunds because some people who file by paper actually do expect the refund, so they haven't been able to get it. It's caused a lot of complications, and some have received this CP 59 notice for failing to file a tax return, even though they filed it over a year ago. So I know you've made some progress in reducing the mail backlog, but unfortunately a large delay still exists. What do you plan to do to mitigate the impact on these taxpayers, and how does this delay impact the processing of the 2020 returns for these same individuals?
We have about 1.7 million returns still in process that were filed prior to January 1 of 2021. Those, for the most part, will be 2019 returns filed in 2020. We are current with respect to our mail. At one point, we had over 20 million pieces of unopened mail. We are current, and that standard is actually right around 1 million pieces of mail. We always have substantial mail. As far as processing returns, it's all hands on deck in our submission processing. We have mandatory overtime, split shifts, dual shifts, mandatory weekends, processing as quickly as we can, and we expect to get through this. The term that we use, fortunately, unfortunately, is summer. Being a lawyer on the outside, I used to categorize things and say, well, that's kind of a lawyer answer. It is, because summer could be May or it could be September. I can just assure you that we are giving it our best. Folks who did not get an EIP, who have not had their 2019 return filed, must file a 2020 return to get their EIP, and we have a lot of avenues to help them with that.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, on that in particular, we've worked with constituents who can't file electronically in 2020 because they don't have the adjusted gross income from 2019, because they haven't received from the IRS, the process return. So it does affect your 2020 filing season as well. So I appreciate you throwing a lot at it. I think you should let us know what more we can do to be helpful, because this is causing real heartburn for people. On the modernization effort, this is an issue that you and I have talked about. One thing we got into legislation in 2019 was to have an independent Office of Appeals. There's a concern about the independence of that office, that the IRS employees, particularly during COVID, they didn't have the ability to have video conferences. Often it was held telephone, making it more difficult, and other concerns that they're not following the rules of independence that we laid out in that legislation. How is the IRS protecting taxpayer data as employees work from home? And what technology is the IRS using to allow IRS employees to review but not retain protected taxpayer data, such as trade secrets?
We take, as you can imagine, because we're one of the largest data warehouses on the planet, other than maybe a few organizations that probably don't have an identity. But beyond that, we collect data from everybody who does business in the United States, as well as every American. So we take to heart the protection and security of the data that we do have. Tying that into the Independent Office of Appeals, we also, from the outside, worked with appeals for 36 years, truly respect the independence of appeals. Most matters that are not resolved at exam are actually resolved inside appeals. And the training and effort, every employee could not become telework eligible because every employee did not have a particular secluded area, maybe at their home, did not have broadband, did not have this or that. So the ability to telework, work from home, and particularly to use access taxpayer data was determined on an individual basis based on the employee's circumstances. And we do have employees who we could not get into it.
We're going to have to move on, Senator Portman, and
Thanks.
look
Thank
forward
you,
to
Chairman.
following that up with you. Senator Cardin, on the web.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Commissioner, thank you for your service and thank you for being before our committee. You've heard so many of our colleagues talk about the tax gap, which is shocking, $1 trillion. That's obviously of concern to every member of our committee. I want to question on the other end, and that is those that are entitled to benefits under the tax code, but have a hard time accessing those benefits. Some use paid tax preparers. Others are having a hard time getting through the requirements in order to get the qualifications. The earned income tax credits a little more challenging than it was before. I regret that we were not able, and I know the chairman worked very hard on this, to give you back the regulatory power in regards to paid tax preparers. But can you just share with us your concern as to being able to protect some of our most vulnerable taxpayers without the ability to regulate the paid tax preparers?
We absolutely need the ability to regulate paid tax preparers, and we need to talk in terms of the most vulnerable taxpayers, the EITC recipients, individuals living in different communities, and also in ethnic communities, individuals who are challenged with the English language. Parts of the preparers, they look to somebody, or if they're in fear of the U.S. government, they look to somebody who might have a comfort factor there. And it's not at all unusual for those individuals, the taxpayers, to be taken advantage of. In the EITC context, 51% of EITC returns are prepared by preparers. The majority of the mistakes made by preparers in an EITC context are significantly greater than mistakes made by individuals who prepare their own EITC returns. Individuals generally know whether a child resided with them or not for more than 6 months, generally know whether they provided more than half of the support. Preparers, in certain contexts, certain preparers take advantage of the situation. If you look at the criminal investigation cases that we refer to the Department of Justice, the vast majority are of preparers. And in the last year, Irs Criminal Investigation ran 450 undercover operations. Many of those were posing as taxpayers in the preparer community, and many of those led to referrals to Department of Justice for prosecution. So without regulation of paid preparers, it's very difficult for us to monitor them. And most preparers, obviously, it goes without saying, are amazing and help the tax administration in this country. They provide comments to you, they provide comments to us, but there's definitely an element out there, as there would be in any type of a community, that take advantage, and we need to go after that element. And without regulation, we're left with either criminal cases or civil fines, which is a much more complex thing. Regulation gives us the ability to preclude them from interacting with the Internal Revenue Service, essentially precluding them from having the ability to prepare returns. We absolutely need that ability.
Mr. Chairman, we've all expressed concerns about the accuracy of the applications for the earned income tax credit and others. And I think what the commissioner is telling us, a lot of this rests with the paid tax preparer. So I would hope that we will once again try to find a bipartisan way forward to provide reasonable authority to the IRS to regulate tax preparers. It's in the consumer interest. It's also in the taxpayer interest that we do this. Mr. Commissioner, I want to ask you one additional question, if I might, and that is your outreach to the underserved communities. We have the VITA programs. What are you doing in order to try to assist those that find it more challenging to get services from government to deal with our tax code?
Well, with respect to this last year, we opened up the low-income taxpayer clinics to actually prepare returns. Obviously, we have the VITA sites. We partnered with more than 11,000 different organizations during the past year with respect to EIPs and filing season. We partnered with over 400 homeless shelters to be able to, what we call trusted partners, to receive information for unsheltered homeless individuals. We did a historic launch in the language area for the first time in history. The Form 1040, and it's the Form 1040 for 2020, is in English and Spanish. Individuals who call into our phone service get translation services in up to 350 different languages. And if I might add one more point, Mr. Chair, the 2020 1040 has a schedule LEP, Limited English Proficiency. So far, and individuals can check one of 20 boxes as to what language they would like us to communicate with them in writing. So far, we've received over 220,000 of those forms completed. And I give this, the benefits of this and all this is IRS employees. I open those doors on languages, as you know. I'm sensitive to the communities. I opened those doors, and our employees went through with passion and were really creative and dedicated.
I would just ask you, as you request additional funds, if additional funds are needed to reach underserved communities, I hope that's part of your request. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Cardin, and thank you for all your leadership on the tax preparer question, which is hugely important to protecting consumers. Senator Whitehouse is next.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioner, good to have you here. When you were here for your confirmation, I asked you about the 501c3, 501c4 reporting problem. As you know, a lot of these organizations report that they have nothing to do with politics when they file with the IRS, consistent with IRS regulations. And then they turn up in election filings at the federal and state level with multi-tens of millions of dollars claimed in filing in spending in political races. That would seem to be a pretty flagrant predicate for a false statement investigation. And yet we have a failure in the government between your organization and the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice won't look at these flagrant, obvious, predicated false statement concerns without a referral from the IRS. I have a separate problem with the Department of Justice over that policy, which I think is idiotic. But setting their problems aside, at the IRS side, have you made any referrals since you've been here for any of these discrepancies in reporting out of 501c3s and particularly 501c4s?
I don't have that data, but I will get you that data. But I will say that...
Would you mind telling me when? Because I have a very long record of executive agencies saying that they'll get me things and then never doing it.
We'll let you know this week when we know, and our
you.
office will be back to you. But people should not assume that we're not doing something just because it's not visible.
Okay. Well, that's why I want to find out. Because I think this referral policy is a mutually agreeable situation between DOJ and IRS where powerful special interests get to get away with things, and neither organization has to deal with any backlash because you don't make referrals and they demand referrals. And to me, that's just not appropriate when you're seeing public reporting showing what seems to be really strong predication for a false statement case, because both of these statements are filed under oath and both are different. And it's hard to see how both can be true. Onto the Treasury Ig for Tax Administration report. The IG says that wealthy taxpayers are paying 39% of what they owe, that $2.4 billion in revenue is lost to the federal government as a result, that this is not a collection priority for your collection folks, that there is no strategy to address non-payment by high-income taxpayers, and the Treasury Ig for Tax Administration made a number of recommendations, and you rejected 5 of them. Can you tell me why?
I think One, I disagree with their report entirely, and I'm more than willing to have a discussion with you separately about that, or anybody else, with respect to sometimes what might be in those reports. But I would draw your attention to the management report there, and I think that the statement that high-income non-filers are not a priority is absolutely false.
All right, well, I'd love to see that, because you're the first person who has
I'll meet with you personally
Said
and
that.
walk through it, and I'll bring our team, and we'll
Great. No, I'd love to see some evidence of that, because all the evidence seems to be the exact opposite way, that you're more likely to get audited if you get an earned income tax credit
That's
as a
false.
very poor person
That's
than
false.
you are to be audited if you're a very wealthy person surrounded by
2019
lawyers.
data book, page 34, table 17A. High-income taxpayers are audited more than any other taxpayer there, over 8% of the people over $10 million. And EITC folks, it's 1.12%, and those are actually hard statistics.
Great.
We're
I
about
wanna-
ready to issue the
I want to get to the
2020
bottom of
data
this
book.
with you.
And I'm more than willing to come and sit with you on that as well, sir.
Last topic is that Congress, on a bipartisan basis, much thanks to the leadership of Senator Crapo, the ranking member on this committee, passed a new law obliging shell corporations to report their true beneficial owner to FinCEN at Treasury, so that we can look behind the screen of these corporations and see what criminals, tax evaders, foreign kleptocrats, and other evildoers are up to using the American corporate shield as their device. Could you give us, in my last minute here, an overview of what you are doing to implement that new law?
We have teams that, when legislation passes, they do it, but the real implementation happens in the trenches. It's our frontline employees. So training the employees on new legislation and having them go seek. Our struggle, as aware, is our frontline agents, which are the examiners, revenue agents, who are our most highly capable employees. We only have 6,500 of them, and they are fully deployed in the high wealth context. In terms of organizations and nonprofits, that's tax-exempt government entities, and I think the committee is aware that our Deputy Commissioner of Services and Enforcement, Sunita Lowe, just moved over to TEGE. She has a strong history with TEGE. She was formerly commissioner in TEGE, and I would encourage you to invite us up for briefings in that space.
All right. So it sounds like at this point, the implementation is primarily in the training of frontline.
No, I wouldn't say that. It takes us a while to train, but it's not just in the training. It's in the front
So
lines.
what else? For instance, have you got a link of some kind with FinCEN so that you can make appropriate requests when this bumps into your
I will
IRS
have
radar?
somebody brief you on exactly what's happened there. That's not something that I'm directly involved in, as you're aware.
That ends my questioning and my time, but Mr. Chairman and Mr. Ranking Member, this may be something that, given the bipartisan support and interest in this committee in getting this shell corporation problem solved, should perhaps be done as a committee-wide briefing so that everybody has the chance to understand what's going on to enforce the law that we passed. I'm happy to take the briefing myself, but I think it's probably going to be of interest to all of a great many of our members.
I'll follow up with the ranking member on that. And the point really is, and the commissioner is seeing this, there's a connection between these issues. We're seeing the huge tax gap. We're seeing the question of the shell companies. We're seeing how modern crooks are constantly being more inventive and have better resources than the people who are trying to catch them when they abuse the laws. So we've got a lot of heavy lifting to do here, and
We are fully supportive of that.
we appreciate that. And Senator Cassidy, I believe, is going to be next on the web.
Yeah, can you hear me, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman?
I can hear
Hey,
the
Mr.
Senator.
Commissioner, thank you very much for the service and for the service of all the Treasury Department employees. Thank you for what y'all are doing. One thing that I proposed is that Louisiana, just our geography, we tend to get more hurricanes than almost anybody else, maybe more than anybody else. And almost every time there's a major disaster in whatever state it occurs, there is going to be some tax provision that allows disaster tax relief. My question is, I've proposed making this permanent. Would it help the IRS if, as opposed to waiting until it's passed to then implement, if you knew that once there was a federally declared disaster of some magnitude, that you would immediately begin to click into the implementation of this. I may be begging the answer, but I still think it's important for the record.
Yeah, I think you're begging the answer a little bit, and everybody should know that we monitor legislation. We plan for that legislation, and when there's multiple bills pending and they start to merge, our planning merges, and that's why I think it's obviously clear, but why we're able to launch our activities as quickly as we are. So, we would be supportive. We have to follow the law. We can't launch until there's actually a law that supports our ability to do so.
So if the law was in place, then granted that the efficiency of your staff would somehow overcomes it. But if the law was in place, obviously you could launch before because the law would already be in place. And I don't think I'm begging that answer. I think I'm just being obvious.
Correct.
Going to a different issue, in May of 2020, Senator Brown and I introduced legislation to ensure that lower income families impacted by the coronavirus outbreak can use their wages reported in the 2019 tax return to determine their eligibility for the EITC and the CTC on their 2020. This was included in the December 2020 relief bill. Can you just give me an update on what IRS has done to make sure that folks will know they're eligible for this relief?
Yeah, again, our outreach, I think, has been more significant than any outreach by the IRS, possibly any federal agency in history. Unfortunately, as a federal agency, sometimes when we think we're doing great, if we put something, for example, on irs.gov or we issue notices, there sometimes tends to be a belief that folks might actually look there. But in this context, during 2020, as I indicated earlier, we partnered with over 11,000 different organizations. We partnered with every other federal agency. We partnered with HUD, and aggressively so in terms of getting the word out, getting forms out, getting instructions out. We had people on the ground throughout the country. We have 511 different offices, and our folks started coming back in June. I did shut it down in March, but our folks started coming back in June, and the vast majority of people who had a reason to be in the office, who could not otherwise telework, were in our facilities.
Got it. Let me ask you one more thing. We talked about it yesterday on the phone, the stimulus checks for prisoners. Last year, when Congress passed the CARES Act, IRS determined prisoners were not eligible. As we spoke, the Ninth Circuit ruled otherwise. I proposed an amendment in this latest COVID relief package to permit those who have been convicted of a crime and sentenced and currently incarcerated from receiving stimulus checks. Surprisingly, that turned out to be partisan, with every Democrat opposing not giving a check to a rapist or a murderer or a terrorist. It was just the most amazing thing. But I recently saw press reports indicating that prisoners in some states had received debit cards which were unusable and had to be replaced. Knowing that the IRS is somewhat stretched thin, there are some folks in my state still waiting on their stimulus checks. So I guess, what is the priority here? Replacing the debit cards for the inmates, or getting folks getting folks who are not incarcerated their stimulus checks? Just kind of amazing. We're giving them to prisoners anyway. And are there administrative challenges to providing stimulus checks for prisoners that take up IRS resources that could be used for other purposes?
The first was the Secretary Mnuchin is the one who made the policy decision on not paying prisoners last year, and then we reversed that when the Ninth Circuit, when the District Court ruled against us. With respect to the debit cards, I think as most people, we actually do the files. We deliver the files to Bureau of Fiscal Services. Bureau of Fiscal Services determines, for unbanked people, they determine whether it's a check or a debit card. Those debit cards should not have been issued by BFS to prisoners. There is a note on the individual's forms that indicate that. And those debit cards came back and would be replaced by checks. And as far as the decision or the policy on prisoners receiving or not receiving, we are only a tax administrator. But the individuals could file a 2020 return. There's a separate issue for prisoners having access to a 2020 return, having access to the online ability. We are distributing over 200,000 simplified Form 1040 packages to over 200 different prison institutions in the country to facilitate their ability to file 2020 returns.
I thank my colleague. Senators are obviously having hectic schedules this morning. So the order now is Senator Cantwell, Senator Brown, and Senator Langford, the next three questioners. Senator Cantwell.
Good morning, Commissioner.
Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioner Reddick. I appreciate you being here today and all your hard work, particularly in such a busy season. I know you already know that you are receiving or have received a letter from myself and Senator Toomey about the tax season and wishing that the first quarter estimate tax payment deadline would be extended to individuals. We don't get this difference between individual filers and estimated filers and the confusion that we think is being caused. And so do you have a comment about the letter? Or, I mean, you do have the ability to do this, correct?
It would be a Treasury call, and I have not received the letter. I'm obviously familiar with the issue, and we will not be extending the estimated payment beyond April 15th.
Well, if it's a Treasury call, then why are you saying that?
Because we are working with Treasury. Obviously, the first call was made with Treasury, and this call was made with Treasury, and I'm a Bureau of Treasury supervised by the Secretary.
Oh, I think I understand that. So we'll,
Yeah, I mean-
we'll take it up with the Treasury, with the Secretary of the Treasury then as well, and the White House, because, look, this makes no sense. You have mom and pop businesses who have a hard time anyway complying with complex regulations, and now we make it seem like they don't have to file until May. But then all of a sudden, they start the process and realize, oh, they were supposed to make a payment anyway. And so this, I think, is confusing. I think it's unnecessarily confusing. You also probably have some 1099 individuals that aren't, you know, if you talk about the gig worker, also really not that sophisticated of a tax filer, and they're also confused by this deadline. So a deadline that's May 17th, but really requires people to do something beforehand is, I think, at least for this segment of the population, confusing. I just don't get it. I just don't get why we're creating this level of uncertainty in this environment, particularly when there's probably other complexity related to the COVID packages and what people might have done under the COVID packages. So then you create more work for yourself later in the process when people overpaid or underpaid, and then we have to, you know, figure that out later. I don't know. It just seems to me it adds to a lot of confusion, which we could be saying to everybody, the deadline is May 17th. That's the deadline.
There are numerous other deadlines that were not extended. The only deadline extended was the filing of the Form 1040 and affected taxpayers associated with the 1040. We did not extend any other deadlines. Last year was different. This year is different.
Well, I think, Mr. Chairman, I think this, personally, I think Senator Toomey and I have a well-founded point, particularly as it relates to small businesses and the confusion. I've certainly heard from lots of people in the state of Washington over this. I'm sure we'll hear more about it later. So I certainly will push my case to the continuation with the rest of Treasury and the administration. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oh, one other question, actually, since I have a minute here. I want to understand, the IRS recently put out proposed regulations on income averaging, which create a set-aside test that operates completely different than the other set-aside tests within the low-income housing tax credit. So I'm concerned about that. I understand there was a hearing on this in March and would like to know if the IRS is considering any changes to the income averaging regulations to bring them more in line with other LIHTC set-aside tests.
I don't have the updated information in the hearing, but we will brief you or your staff and do that in short order.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell. Senator Brown is next on the web. And then Senator Langford is next, and we will wait for Senator Brown. Senator Langford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Redding, thanks for all the work. There's a lot going on, to say the least. IRS is being tapped right now to both send checks when you're really designed to be able to receive taxes and be able to process those efficiently. There is a tremendous backlog right now that you're working through, I understand. Can you give us an update on backlog on mail coming in and what the status is for being able to answer mail? We still get a tremendous amount of calls of people saying they're calling the office trying to be able to get through as well. So help us understand the status on that.
We are current on our mail, which means that we have a more typical backlog, which is about 1 million pieces of mail being processed. In terms of returns, we have about 1.7 million returns that came in during 2020, and that is a priority for us to get through those returns. In terms of level of service and the phone calls, the volume of inbounds has gone up probably as much as 4 times, depending upon the time of the day. I think I might have indicated earlier that we have received as many as 1,500 phone calls per second on some of the days. Our IRS.gov has had over 1 billion hits in calendar year 21. And one of the issues is that the level of service and the staffing and whatnot inherent with that is determined about 2 years in advance, and it's an appropriated item. We did get budget to bring on board 1,000 people and from the last act, and those people are in training. It takes 14 weeks to train them, to get them on the phones, because obviously somebody who's trained is better on the phones than somebody who's not trained. So all I can really say is we appreciate the patience and understanding of everyone. We are operating, I used a term earlier, all hands on deck. We are doing that everywhere. A lot of these activities, we cannot take somebody from one position and move them to another. One, we need them in that position. 2, they might not be trained. But what we have done, where people have moved off of a certain position and they were previously trained, we have taken those folks back into that position to try to do our best. And we get it, that it's far from perfect.
Great. All right, that's helpful to be able to get the update and be able to get that out. Economic impact payments, when they went out last year, individuals that received those checks were fine. They received those. Others that didn't receive it for whatever reason, they can then file it on their taxes. What I'm finding from some of my constituents now is that they filed it on their taxes, and if they had outstanding debt, that debt is being withdrawn. Of course, they're calling our office and saying, hey, if I received the check, I would have just received the entire thing. If there was other debt that was outstanding, it's being withdrawn from it. Can you help provide any clarity there?
Yeah, that's there's certain provisions in certain areas that allow for an offset as far as the EIPs with respect to tax debt. EIP 1 was different than 2, and 3 was different than 1 and 2. Individuals should reach out to us if they're in that, but essentially we're following the law. We're trying to do our best. Where we can exercise discretion, we're exercising discretion.
Okay, let me ask about cryptocurrency, because I've had folks that have asked for a very confusing aspect of our law, which is, again, what I want to try to get from you is what clarity is needed on this. Anytime a cryptocurrency is cashed in or changed into a fiat currency, it's a taxable event because it's property that's actually moving into that. What would you suggest is the best place to be able to get information, and what do we need to do in Congress to be able to deal with the cryptocurrency issues and to be able to clarify what is a taxable event, non-taxable event, and how they can actually manage that?
Yeah, we have issued some guidance. We'll continue to issue guidance. We work with Treasury with respect to the issuance of guidance. And, it's not too dissimilar than other property type issues and interests that people have. There are some uniqueness to it, in terms of split forks and such. But by and large, it's there. In terms of assisting us in that arena, obviously information reporting would be significant and huge, helping us going forward. That's kind of a universal answer to us on our behalf, but it definitely works. More information reporting assists us in the tax administration.
What would that look like for you to get more information reporting for that?
1099s.
Okay, for each of those events?
If they're electronically filed, yes. Paper filed, we probably might trim it down.
Obviously, lots of folks use cryptocurrency for a lot of transactions just in their daily or regular life. It may not be daily, it may be monthly, it may be weekly even for different events. So you would consider each of those a 1099 taxable event, whether it's...
Oh, no, I'm saying 1099s. I'm not necessarily saying that they're taxable events. Right. You can have transfers, you can split, you can do a lot of different things that are not taxable events. That's the guidance that we need to issue, and that's between us and Treasury to get that guidance out. But I think we've issued a considerable amount of guidance considering the volume of crypto that's out there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank my colleague. Next 3 questioners will be Senator Brown, Senator Casey, and I see Senator Daines, the next 3. Senator Brown on the web.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hate to go before Bob Casey on his birthday, but you called on me, so I will. So, Commissioner, first of all, I want to start by saying thank you to your outstanding employees at the IRS. You and your workers, the people, the professionals of the IRS have withstood years of budget cuts, then the pandemic, and a Congress that keeps giving you more and more work to do, even right in the middle of the filing season. The IRS has been under-resourced for years. You have my commitment to get you the resources you need. I know Chairman Wyden cares about that. to hold corporations accountable for taxes they owe, getting working families the tax returns they need, including that they've earned, including the significant expansion of the Earned Income Tax Credit and the Child Tax Credit we passed in the American Rescue Plan, including monthly distributions, as we've talked, Commissioner, of the CTC. The expectation from me and from Senator Bennett, especially on this committee, and other members of Congress, is the distribution will start going out monthly starting in July. My question, simple, is the IRS on track for monthly payments starting in July?
We are. If we end up not being on track for some unforeseen situation, we will advise you and the committee.
Thank you for that, Commissioner. On a related note, I want to address the alarmism we hear from some of my friends across the aisle about improper payments with the ITC and CTC. That alarmism ignores the billions in revenue we're losing out on from corporations and wealthy people who use every trick in the book to try to get out of paying their fair share. I'd remind my colleagues we've already passed a set of program integrity measures with their support in 2015 as part of the PATH Act. 2 additional bipartisan measures we can take to reduce improper payments and make sure Americans get the refunds they've earned. One of them, Senator Cardin mentioned. I thank him for leading that effort that mattered in terms of tax and regulating paid tax preparers. Just to follow up on that question, would we see fewer improper payments if IRS could set minimum competency standards for paid tax preparers?
I believe absolutely yes.
Thank you. And I appreciate our private conversation last week about that. As I run out of time, I'll raise another bipartisan way to ensure more accurate returns. That's by supporting VITA, the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program. VITA has a 94% accuracy rate, as you know, Commissioner. If you want an accurate EITC or CTC returns prepared, have it done by a VITA volunteer. Commissioner, I know that VITA is stretched thinner than ever. Will you use part of the IRS funding from the American Rescue Plan to support VITA through the calendar year to help families get their stimulus checks and their child tax credit?
VITA is an appropriated item, and we are using every resource, including numerous IRS employees volunteer for VITA. I just got an email yesterday from an employee expressing her pride of the volume of folks coming in to do returns and getting EIPs. She said over 98% of the ones that she's done returns for have received their EIPs, and she was very proud to participate. And that goes throughout our agency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Brown, and especially for recognizing those wonderful volunteers. They're such an incredible asset right now. Senator Daines. No, excuse me. Senator Casey is next, and then Senator Daines. Senator Casey.
Mr. Chairman, thanks very much, and I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the work that you did working with Senator Brown, Senator Bennett, and others on the expansion of the child tax credit and so many other provisions in the rescue plan that relate to children and seniors. And I know we have more work to do, but I want to commend and salute your work. And some of the questions that I will raise with the Commissioner are critically important to the people of Pennsylvania, as the Commissioner knows. And I want to thank the Commissioner not only for his public service, but for spending the time recently, as he did with so many members, to meet with us, with me and my team, and discuss some of the challenges that Pennsylvanians are facing in tax filing. And we understand, or at least I have some sense of the task that your team has undertaken this past year. And I have in the past and will continue to advocate for the IRS to have the resources available to fulfill its responsibilities to taxpayers. My office, as the Commissioner knows, has heard from Pennsylvanians whose returns have been referred to the error resolution system, but have not received communication from the IRS as to why their return was flagged or how to correct their return. So I'd start with this question, Commissioner. Can you explain the steps that the IRS is taking now to ensure taxpayers understand why their returns are being flagged?
We've done a fairly, again, IRS speak, maybe not in the private sector or other people, but for us, we believe we've done a pretty fair amount of outreach, and we continue to do so. In terms of the error resolution service, historically, it's been about a 3 to 5 day process. It's currently running about 10 to 14 days. We currently have an inventory of about 1 million, exceeding 1 million, but about 1 million matters there. Where we could, in other arenas, we've actually transshipped physical items and returns to other campuses. I think, as everybody knows, the error resolution system operates out of Kansas City. The top 5 issues of why returns are in there, just quickly, is return recovery rebate, matching EIP 1, EIP 2 against their RRC claim, EITC to people who elected for 2019 as opposed to 2020. The additional child care credit they claim on the return doesn't match the information that we have, EITC math errors, and the last one that we received a premium tax credit. They received a premium tax credit, but they did not file the Form 8962. And for individuals who do their own returns, the software actually requests that. But those have been the most prevalent, and they're fairly consistent across the board as to what's pulling returns out. And error resolution service is a manual process. And we have put as many folks in there as we can, and we get it, and those need to be processed. And we're doing the best we can. That doesn't mean that we're doing well, but we are doing the best we can.
Well, Commissioner, thanks for your attention to that issue. I wanted to make reference to a report in March in the Washington Post. The Post reported that a caller was told by an IRS call center agent that over 7 million returns were sent into the error resolution system to, quote, buy time, unquote. Just ask you by way of follow-up, can you share how the number of returns being routed to error resolution this filing season compares to previous years? And also, second question is, what is the IRS plan to resolve this?
Well, first, let me
Part
address
of which I think you spoke to.
Let me address the Washington. We don't do something to buy time. If somebody gave that comment, they didn't know what they were saying, and they shouldn't be working for the Internal Revenue Service. We're a service organization on behalf of the people in this country, and that's just outrageous. And nobody should say that. We do our best, and we have processes, and those processes are in place. In terms of error resolution, historically we did not have issues with respect to individuals who could elect, say, in this year, 2019, as opposed to 2020 for their EITC. We did not have the matching with respect to EIP 1, 2, and the return recovery rebate. Those are the top 2 of the 5 most prevalent issues as to why things get into IRS. And it has certainly increased the volume. If you wanted a year-to-date volume, I don't have that present, but I certainly could get it to you. But we got hit with a couple of additional issues. We got hit with the pandemic. We got hit with staffing issues, and we've had difficulty hiring during this period of time. And we are hiring for anybody who might be watching and listening. And I, on behalf of every member of the committee, now or at other times, I would encourage and invite you to visit some of our facilities. Our employees would very much like to see you, the ones who are on site. And it's quite meaningful when people do show up. We have had people show up, members of Congress show up at some of our facilities, and it does help the motivation of our employees.
Commissioner, thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
I thank our colleague, and if it didn't come through, a big happy birthday to our friend. Our next questioner will be Steve Daines.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Rettig, thanks for being here today. As Montana's U.S. Senator and bringing 28 years of private sector experience to this job, I truly believe we are here to serve and not to be served. I believe it's very important that government works to make life easier for Montanans and all Americans on issues they're facing every day, for example, paying taxes. A Montanan from Billings brought an issue to my attention that I'd like just to briefly discuss. This individual lost his mother in January of 2020, and only then found out that she had not filed her taxes for her fiscal years 2017, 2018, and 2019 due to the fact she was ill. He completed and mailed the returns to the IRS in April of 2020, so about a year ago. This Montanan is trying to close out the estate. However, he can't do so until he receives the refunds as a result of filing these tax returns. The IRS is not showing they received the refunds. My office has submitted copies of these returns to the IRS to ensure that they had them. I've heard from other Montanans who have e-filed or mailed in returns that are not showing up in the IRS system as having been received. And in some instances, this backlog has prevented individuals from even receiving their economic impact payment. My question, Commissioner Rettig, and I thank you for your passion in the comments you made about service. I think that's really important in the role that you have, and we all have. Could you provide any sort of timetable for when the IRS might fully clear out its mail backlog and help Montanans might be navigating through tough situations like this constituent from Billings?
Our mail is current. We have 1 million pieces of mail. We get about 1 million to 1.5 million pieces of mail per week, and we work through 1 million to 1.5 million pieces of mail per week. Obviously, we're a large operation in terms of that. So our mail is current. On the matters that you referenced, I would encourage if your staff reaches out to me or to my staff, and I think pretty much everybody on the committee has my cell phone. I've handed that out to members of the committee, and with the intent that you do so, and feel free to use it to me, and then also Deputy Commissioner Jeff Triviano, because items that seem unusually long, and certainly April seems unusually long with respect to the estate, we will have somebody look into that.
Good. I appreciate that, and I know that Montana will as well. We'll do that. We'll follow up, and thanks for that open door. Switching gears, I want to talk briefly about conservation easements. This is something that we talked about on the phone last week. I was glad to see mentioned in your written testimony. Thank you. Senator Stabenow and I will soon reintroduce our Charitable Conservation Easement Program Integrity Act, which seeks to restore faith in this very valuable conservation incentive by cracking down on these abusive, syndicated conservation easement transactions. Montana, in fact, is the national leader in the number of acres under conservation easement, with over 2.6 million acres conserved by these voluntary agreements. That's a big reason why I'm very passionate about eliminating the abuse, these bad actors who are taking this tax deduction. Could you provide a brief update of where things stand with syndicated conservation easements? For instance, approximately how many cases has the IRS prosecuted?
By head count, we have 28,000 taxpayers under examination in those easements. We have cases in tax court. We have cases in various other courts. We have cases in IRS appeals. We have in excess, well, for tax years 2016, 17, and 18, we have about $21 billion of deductions that we don't believe people are entitled to. We'll soon have information with respect to 19. I know the committee has held hearings in the space of syndicated conservation easements. We have criminal matters. We recently received 2 guilty pleas down in Georgia from some advisors. We have just announced this week somebody agreed to a lifetime injunction to preclude themselves from the ability to participate in these. We have quite a few cases, civil and criminal, with respect to advisors and others. But really, to get through it, I think most people would say we absolutely need legislation. The legislation's been pending. We would certainly like to work with members of Congress on legislation and administrability of such legislation.
What's your sense, approximately, what it might cost the IRS to litigate these cases one by one? It's got to be a very costly endeavor.
It's absolutely hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we're up against people who are funding litigation to the extent of millions and millions of dollars per case.
And then do you think these resources could be put to use elsewhere if legislation like the Charitable Conservation Easement Program Integrity Act is signed into law?
Yeah, there's no shortage of places for the IRS to put its resources. We are resource challenged. So in this space, we have many hundreds of employees, from lawyers down through agents and everybody in between, plus support folks. It just needs to be stopped.
Thank you. And I want to thank you, Commissioner Rettig. Please pass along my gratitude to your workforce, which I know has been working very, very hard for the past 12 months under difficult circumstances.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I thank my colleague. And next will be Senator Warner, who I think is going to be questioning on the web. Senator Warner, are you out there in cyberspace?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And,
great.
Let me follow up on, pick up where my colleague Senator Daines just left off. And Commissioner, thank you and your workforce. I know with a pandemic, with stimulus payments being sent out, it's been a incredibly challenging year, and I'm going to take you up on your invitation to go out and visit the workforce. I think Senator Casey tried to ask you, though, because we are, though, still hearing from a number of constituents.
Yeah, great. You got Debbie.
A number of constituents who are concerned about the fact of, 2019 tax returns still not being processed. I believe Senator Casey asked if you had any idea of the backlog, and I would be curious in how many tax returns prior to January 1, 2021 are still being processed. Can you get us that number at some point for the record?
1.7 million.
All right, 1.7, thank you. And you had said, I believe, in testimony before the House that you were going to try to get through this backlog by the summer. Are you still on track to do that?
We are.
I think it's also, as we get into the president's new proposal on infrastructure and how we pay for it, one of the areas where there might be broad-based understanding is this tax gap, which I understand some estimates, National Bureau of Economic Research said about $600 billion. I understand, Commissioner, you've said it may be as large as $1 trillion. I think President Biden has moved forward with increased funding proposal at about 10%. I know former Commissioners Rossetti and Goldberg have argued for a more dependable multi-year income stream. Have you seen a proposal out there on a multi-year income stream that might give you and your workforce a little more assurance about funding that you would be willing to support?
I personally, and as Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, fully support every proposal from every person with respect to funding. What we need is consistent, adequate, multi-year funding, and it needs to be appropriated in the right positions, and there's accounting, financial issues as to where it needs to go so that we can get the best use for it. We proudly serve more Americans than any other organization, public or private. I think it's in everybody's best interest. And I think folks are aware that we account for 96% of the gross revenue of the United States of America. Our last gross revenue fiscal 19 was $3.56 trillion. And when we look at the tax gap, we know that we could do better. The desire of our employees is there to do better. We need the tools, we need the resources, we need the staffing, we need the training, we need modernization, we need information reporting. It's a multifaceted approach, but I believe, and my interactions with members of the committee, I think there's strong bipartisan support to get us there. And I know that it's our responsibility to handle any funds we get efficiently and appropriately, and we intend to do so. And I've invited, from before I became commissioner, oversight from this committee and everybody else on any funds that the Internal Revenue Service gets. I see us in this together. Tax administration doesn't just belong to the Internal Revenue Service. It belongs to members of Congress and belongs to taxpayers, belongs to tax professionals, and I think we can get to a better place.
One of the things I hope to work with you on, and one of the disappointments in the March package we just completed, was that we didn't do the full level of IT modernization. That again is not a silver bullet, but we do know your systems need to be upgraded. In my last minute, I just want to raise the issue of gig workers. 16 million gig workers in America. I don't think we're going to go back to a traditional 40-hour W-2 work week for all workers going forward. One of the most important things I think we did in the initial CARES Act under the chairman's leadership was expand unemployment to cover gig workers. I know in the American Rescue Plan, we made some additional steps forward on making sure that those workers who make more than $600 a year, that employers or payers would send out 1099s. Commissioner, could you talk about other programs that you're looking at the IRS on how we can deal with this 16 million and growing contingent of the American workforce that does contingent or gig work, and how we can make their interactions with the IRS easier?
Part of the issue, with gig workers is our need for outreach, guidance, education, and the rest. And a lot of folks who get into a certain element of gig work, if you will, do so temporarily, or it's a second job, and then they move on to another job, or they move on to education, and they do a lot of different things. So from that perspective, it's somewhat of a transient workforce, and it's difficult for us to actually connect with directly when we do that. And again, mainstream media tends to be one of the best outlets, much more so than irs.gov, because the average gig worker is not necessarily going on irs.gov to see our latest notice. And my point there being that it's a collective responsibility for the IRS, for members of Congress, as well as folks on the outside, to get our messages across clear in single syllables and be direct and timely. And we take that to heart, and we do our best.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank my colleague. Senator Young, I believe, is next on the web.
Well, welcome to the committee, Commissioner Rettig, and thanks for taking time out of your schedule. I know it's been a really busy time for the IRS. You've seen your role greatly increase over the past year in the midst of this pandemic. Your employees have been asked to undertake all manner of COVID-related duties, like distributing each round of economic impact payments to Americans, and still taking all necessary requirements to keep IRS employees safe amid the pandemic. I understand the challenges presented to the IRS, but I have to say I do have deep concerns regarding the delays that Hoosiers continue to see over a year into this crisis. An early and recurring complaint that I receive from constituents involves the backlogs from our regional offices, namely the IRS Processing Center in Kansas City. Even with the involvement of local taxpayer advocates, we still have constituents waiting on 2019 refunds, sometimes with no reason provided for the delay. Can you please explain the process that the IRS has adopted in order to process the backlog of tax returns, sir?
It's our submission processing element of what we refer to as Wage and Investment Operating Division. And as I indicated, we have all hands on deck. We're doing multiple shifts, mandatory overtime. We're doing weekends. Folks who were trained in that lane, who went on to other positions within the Internal Revenue Service, have been detailed back into that. So we have the maximum amount of folks dedicated to that. About 5 million returns that are in process are actually returns where we have asked for additional information, whether it's a form or certain information as in EITC space, verifying that children are qualifying children for EITCs. And so we've actually sent out requesting that information, and that ties into our mail side, because if those folks have actually responded in paper mail, in our mail side of the house, our mail backlog is about 1 million pieces of mail, which is actually current. It's not a backlog. We average 1 million to 1.5 million pieces of mail a week, and that's what we process. And process means we open it and we enter it into our system and we redirect it to where it needs to go. We are moving that as quickly as possible. I get it, and very sensitive to the fact of, you mentioned things like refunds and whatnot. And certainly, in addition to that, refunds for the most vulnerable taxpayers, the EITC, CTC folks out there. And I want to assure you, we are doing everything we can. There's a high degree of concern and dedication. And I get it that doing everything we can didn't get somebody their payment earlier, but we are doing everything we can in that space. We have used every resource possible to get us.
Including addressing major bottlenecks. The Irs Department in Kansas City and the processing of unopened mail from over a year ago has been a challenge. But from what I'm hearing from you is you are diverting resources to attend to challenges like that. Is that accurate, sir?
We are, and we transship physical mail among our 4 different campuses for processing, specifically out of Kansas City into Austin, Memphis, and Ogden to handle that. And the Irs is now averaging about 10 to 14 days, whereas historically it was about 3 to 5 days to process.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. In my remaining time, I'd like to discuss an issue that is of great concern to me, the tax gap. As you know, the tax gap is the difference between the taxes legally owed and taxes that are actually paid. The gap results from individual taxpayers and businesses underreporting their income, overreporting tax-preferred activities, failing to file, or underpaying taxes owed. Mr. Commissioner, the law needs to be followed, and I think we should all obviously agree on that. In response to the chairman's questioning earlier, Mr. Commissioner, you shared your estimate that the tax gap could approach $1 trillion per year. Now, just to reemphasize the point, you're stating that if everyone paid exactly what the tax code says today, without increasing current tax rates, no increases in tax rates, the IRS would collect an additional $1 trillion every year. Is this correct?
That's what the tax gap represents, but it must be acknowledged that I think in history, most people have indicated with resources, the IRS could probably bring in 10, 15, 20%. I think a modernized IRS could actually beat that. I'm just relying on historical estimates. But when I see, I came from the private sector, and when I see the employees and the dedication, you see it in their eyes, you know what their heart and soul is to try to get this done. Our people are equally offended by people who don't comply. And the other side of that is they want to support those who do comply. And so both components of that are there. And I think a modernized IRS, give us the tools, give us the resources, let us bring on people. We're down 17,000 enforcement people over the last decade. That has to have an effect, and it does. And, certain elements of society take advantage of an agency like the IRS if they think we're on our back.
Mr. Commissioner, I'm going to follow up with you about what.
I appreciate that.
So I can better understand what constitutes a modern IRS and how we might work together to address this. It's my understanding high-income taxpayers account for most of the tax gap. Is that accurate, sir?
And corporations, yes.
And corporations. Why might the IRS have difficulties in verifying certain high-end earning taxpayers' income to ensure that they're paying what they legally owe?
If you look at the report that was recently published on NEBS, NEBS, 2 IRS researchers were involved, and they looked at 2 different components. One is offshore, and the offshore, FATCA and other components helped with respect to offshore, and obviously IRS ran various programs in the offshore arena. But the other area that they looked at where we need help is in pass-throughs, partnerships as corporations. Tiered partnerships are, sometimes used to mask. You add some foreign elements there. You add a private foundation into there. It's very difficult for us to get there. We did just bring on, we had a hiring in the pass-through arena. We brought on more agents, sophisticated, experienced folks from private sector than we ever have before.
Senator Young, we're just going to have to move on and appreciate the areas you're looking at. Senator Cortez Masto is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, it's good to see you again. Thanks for coming before the committee. As you remember, we exchanged letters about making sure that survivors of domestic violence could access their economic impact payments. My letter included a list of steps the IRS could take to help survivors get their checks. And was on telephone calls with you as well regarding this. In your last hearing before this committee, you said that many of the suggestions were good, yet you have implemented very few of them to date. I'm frustrated that your verbal commitment to me on this issue doesn't seem to match the agency's actions. So my question to you is, what are you currently doing to help domestic violence survivors get their economic impact payment? And please tell me the systems and reforms you put in place to help these survivors really to not only address their concerns about getting this relief, but also in the future.
I think you're aware the issue on domestic violence victims is not in the statute for us to be able to peel out and make a duplicate payment to somebody if the abuser, if you will, received both payments and took both payments and whatnot. And I know initially folks took the position that it's a civil matter between the abuser and the abused victim. And I realize and sensitive to the fact that that's not an appropriate answer for the victim. But as an administrative agency, we have limited discretion in a lot of different arenas. There was nothing in the IP3 that addressed this issue either. And if the IRS actually had the authority to issue a duplicate payment for victims of domestic violence and had the ability to demonstrate that, and there are areas where we can put information in our system to identify not to share information belonging to one spouse to the other spouse. We have that ability, but we don't have the discretion to actually make a duplicate payment, and payments made.
So I get the fact about the duplicate payment. What else are you doing to address the concerns that we highlighted for you in the future, now and in the future, for domestic violence survivors?
We have guidance, we have outreach. Our people have been on the ground, with presentations. We've done remote presentations through Zoom and the rest. And, I will follow up with you and get you more specifics. I'm sensitive to your initial comments, and, if that's how you feel, I'd like to talk to you individually. I think you also have my cell phone, and I consider myself pretty reachable. So
Commissioner, thank you.
I'd like
but my frustration is that this is the same conversation we've already had, and you were responsive in the sense that you got on the phone with me, talked about how we can work together, find innovative.
Maybe we could work together on legislation.
I hope so. Listen, I hope so. Let me ask you this. I understand the IRS is preparing a change of circumstances portal to allow taxpayers to update changes in information that determine their ability to access their stimulus payments and other payments. Talk to me a little bit about that. What gives you authority to make that change of circumstances portal? And what is that all about?
That's in the statute. With respect to the CTC, to launch by July 1, and people who have changed family circumstances or people who want to opt out of the what will be monthly payments for the CTC will be able to use the portal beginning July 1. A challenge will be somebody who has changed family circumstances. They put information in there in July, and they're expecting their August payment to be different. That will be a challenge for the agency, but we'll do our best. But we'll also have to messenger around that. If we can't make it for the next month, we need to let people know that in advance. But it's in the statute. And
so this potential portal could help survivors of domestic violence as well, address some of the concerns that they have?
Not as it's going to launch in July 1, but let me get back to you on that.
Okay. Yes, please
I appreciate
do.
the question.
There's an opportunity here, and if we have to pass legislation, we'll look at legislation. I think there are innovative ways that we can talk. Across the country, secretaries of state are doing innovative things about how we address survivors of domestic violence, make sure that they are getting access to the mail that they need, the information that they need. And I think there's a way for the IRS to do it as well. And I'm hopeful that we can work together. The last thing I want is folks really at the IRS to say, no, we just don't do it that way. I'm looking for somebody that's innovative, that really is looking forward and thinking, yeah, maybe there's a way we can figure something out, look at legislation. That I was hopeful that we were able to do when I initially contacted you years ago. So I am hopeful we can try to address this. And I really would look forward to you reaching out to some of the advocate groups that are out there that have been bringing forward these issues to really look and fight for our survivors around domestic violence. So thank you for being here, and I will follow up with you.
I thank my colleague. Senator Sass is next on the web.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioner, thanks for being here. I'd like to talk about the employee retention credit. This was a part of the CARES Act, and obviously the congressional purpose in it was to encourage employers to keep employees on their payrolls during the pandemic and the lockdowns. In December of last year, Congress made some changes to the credit to try to enhance its usefulness. One of the purposes there was to retroactively allow employers who took PPP loans to be eligible for the credit. Given the economic strain caused by the pandemic, it's obviously incredibly important that businesses are incentivized to both rehire and to retain their exit employees. Can you just discuss a little bit the IRS's implementation of this credit, as well as any efforts you're making to retroactively provide refunds to businesses that became eligible because of the December change, please?
Yeah, where we can, we do recoveries, but with respect to the retention, I think that we actually received around 56,000. I think we processed about 47,000. Many of them that were rejected because they otherwise filed a 941. And so rather than getting the advance, they should have it with respect to the 941 itself. But we've been processing those as quickly as possible.
So help me understand that on the 941 point, because we're hearing about this from some Nebraska businesses. Were your numbers 56,000 applied and 47,000?
About 56,017 or something like that received, and I think we've processed about 47,000 of those. And which would leave a current pool, if I'm correct, of about 10,000. I'll get you the specific numbers, but that's the numbers that I recollect as of within the last week or so.
Okay, so but as the 10,000, is that just a backlog, or do you mean those are people who applied for it on both sides and they should have only applied on one?
Some of the 47,000 are folks who have applied for both sides and were given information back indicating that they, if you've already done a 941, it comes on the 941, not the 7,200. So we had that situation, and we can get you specifics. We have quite a bit of data here, and I know some other members of the committee have asked for questions in this space as well. So let me get you up-to-date, accurate data as far as the ones that are pending, why they are pending, and then the ones that have been processed, yet my term would be rejected, but why they were rejected, and we should be able to provide that for you in short order.
That'd be great. I have 3 follow-up questions in that lane, but I'll just wait for your data because you're probably going to speak to what I was going to ask there. So then I'll just conclude by asking, could you give us a bit of a status check on the interaction between you all, the IRS, and the Small Business Administration on whether or not we think we're adequately explaining to small businesses and to their tax advisors any complications in this space? Just give us a status report on the interaction between the 2 agencies.
Again, let me put that in 2 pieces. 1, somebody who was in private practice for 36 years. 2, somebody who's with the government. I think the government view is that we do really great with respect to outreach, and this is not to be disparaging of anybody in our communications and other departments or for SBA or for others, but we sometimes are narrow focused on the lanes that we know, the lanes that historically our agency has been in, and certainly with respect to PPP and other issues that have come up during the pandemic, those lanes are not sufficient to actually get the information out to members of the public. I think we've done well in terms of outreach beyond our normal lanes, but I think we all would agree we could all do better, and we constantly try to do better. We have modified. We had lessons learned from March of last year through June of last year through September of last year through today. We're doing things better. Our outreach is better, and that's kind of what I would give it. And I get it on the outside why some people in certain lanes say, "Hey, I just didn't know this," and I had that in private practice as well. So I can only really say that we are trying our best. We do think, from an agency perspective, that we've done amazingly well. But every time somebody did not get something, obviously that calls out that we could do better.
Thank you, sir. I'm at time, but thank you for being here.
We'll follow up.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we will next move to Senator Bennett.
Thank you, Commissioner. I don't know if you can see me. My video is.
We can't see you, but we can hear you. Oh, there we go. We got it both ways.
There we go. Commissioner, I want to thank you for being here at the age of 6. I had a meeting at the Boys and Girls Club of Pueblo, Colorado last week with parents, and I was asking them, whether it was important for them to get these checks on in a monthly basis or whether it was a more periodic period would work for them. And not surprisingly, as any parent can tell you, expenses like diapers and formula and childcare can't wait until tax time, and monthly payments are particularly important during the pandemic with so many low and middle income families are experiencing significant challenges. I think the intent was clear with the American Rescue Plan, and that was for the expanded CTC payments to be available monthly starting in July of this year. So I'd ask you, Commissioner, whether you can commit to sending CTC payments starting in July and delivering them on a monthly basis.
We fully expect to launch in July. We expect to launch with payments going out on a monthly basis. And I think I might have commented earlier to the effect that we will launch the portal, that it is going to be as user-friendly as possible. But as we did with respect to the non-filers portal, as we did with respect to the Get My Payment portal, as we did with respect to pretty much every IT product that we provide, certainly externally, we will enhance that over the course of probably the first 6 months or so, 3 to 6 months or so, to make it more so. We'll monitor the traffic, we'll monitor the activity, If we see people having difficulty on certain aspects, we will have to deal with that and monitor that. There is an authentication level that will be, moderately significant. Anytime we open a system to allow an individual to provide information as to that individual, we need certain levels of verification. And the more information they're able to provide, the higher that level of verification needs to be. And so that'll be one area that we'll certainly need to monitor closely. But we will pay attention, and we expect to launch July 1.
I deeply appreciate.
If we're unable to do so, you will hear from me as well. But right now,
that's all I was going to ask for. I deeply appreciate that answer, and please let us know if there's anything that we can do between now and then to make sure that to do whatever we can do to make sure you and your folks are successful at that. One of the most important steps we took in the American Rescue Plan was to make the child tax credit fully refundable. As you know, previously a third of all children, 27 million kids, were left out of the full CTC, mostly because their parents earned too little to qualify for the full credit. We fixed that flaw for this coming year, and I sincerely hope we're going to make that fix permanent going forward. Many of these newly eligible children are in the nation's most vulnerable families who face barriers to navigate, as you were just saying, our complex tax code, especially during the pandemic, and many of them may not have a filing requirement at all. I was worried when I heard you say in March that families will need to file a 2020 tax return in order to receive their advanced child tax payments, and I was wondering whether it would be possible for the IRS to use information from a 2019 return if they filed one, or the Social Security Administration or Veterans Administration to locate many of these families and determine their eligibility. Are there more creative ways for us to skin this cat?
We do work closely with other federal agencies, and certainly I think everybody's aware during the pandemic with respect to SSA, VA, and others. We also work with respect to a lot of state agencies and others, and where we can, we try our best. One issue with respect to the filing of tax returns is tax returns get us the information so that we know the amount of the credits that we are to provide by law under both the CTC and the EITC and otherwise. And without that return information, and certainly current information is better than old information. And then in addition, banking information is critical, and current banking information is extremely critical.
I appreciate that answer as well, and I think that the work that you're doing on the non-filer portal is going to be enormously important to answering these questions in a way that gets the American people the help that they need. So, Mr. Chairman, I will yield back. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Senator Bennett. Senator Barrasso.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Shortly after passage of the American Rescue Plan Act, I got an email from a constituent in Wyoming. She is a tax preparer, and she let her feelings be known about the inclusion in the bill of retroactive provisions that were implemented during the middle of the tax filing season. She had already filed taxes for some of her clients, and then when you get a sudden change in the law, what she had done was now wrong. I know that's not your doing, that's the law, that's the mistake made by the way that this was passed through Congress. But essentially she was, asking, reading between the lines, are we all nuts for doing sort of thing while we have preparers all around the country who are working and sending in things, and, clients who have signed forms that are now incorrect. Trying to explain that doesn't make it any better for what she is going through, and her clients are as well. So can you understand the anger that my constituents are experiencing having the rules changed after the work was completed correctly and submitted?
I personally know more than 1,000 tax return preparers. Let me just leave it at that, including my wife.
So you can appreciate
I hear everything in the system every single day, in the morning, in the evening, and sometimes I get phone calls.
So in terms of the resources and manpower that you use at the IRS, what's the impact on your own staff when you have to deal with situations like this?
I will say that the IRS as an agency and the employees of the IRS have been spectacular in rising to challenges. The unemployment, the exclusion was a significant challenge for us, and I think that the innovation of our employees allowed us to be able to do something where people will not have to file amended returns who had already filed returns. And it'd be easier for me to say this if I was on the outside, but I think that that's absolutely spectacular and a sign of the employees, but absolutely a challenge. And it's more challenges on more challenges and more challenges.
Well, along those lines, Senator Cantwell touched on this during her questions, and I'd like to add my support to what Senator Cantwell had to say. Because the Treasury Department and IRS agreed to extend the tax filing deadline for individuals from April 15th to May 17th. After visiting with a number of CPAs back home, I don't understand the logic of the limited extension. In particular, since the deadlines to file the estimated payments was still left at April 15th. So individuals who had to make estimated payments must virtually complete their 2020 return to determine what their estimated tax payment is going to be for the first quarter so they could get it in by this Thursday. So the extension to a month from now really was no benefit to those taxpayers. And in fact, I'd argue that the extension created more confusion and stress for the taxpayers and the professionals working with them. So, were you given an explanation by your boss, the Secretary of Treasury, Janet Yellen, as to the logic behind not extending it beyond this, especially as it relates to taxpayers who need to file their estimated tax?
There's two ways that, I was a small business owner in more than one occasion, different businesses on the outside. I grew up in a small business. My dad had a truck. I probably know hundreds of small business owners, and I probably know hundreds of tax preparers preparing returns for small business owners. And the issue that's being floated around is actually the difficulty, if you will, for small business owners. Let me give you an example of a small business owner. A small business owner who, for calendar 21, might have $100,000 net profit. Over that, I might start to argue it's no longer a small business owner. But if I had $100,000 net profit, I might have $32,000 of taxable income. You divide that by 4. Theoretically, I owe $8,000 as of April 15. I file my return, Schedule C. I file that return as of May 17. I pay my $8,000 on May 17, and I will do that. And the question that people are raising, and I've had discussions with members of this committee, I've had discussions with people in the House, and we have received substantial amount of comments from people on the outside, including people inside organizations that are sending letters to you all disagreeing with the content of the letters you are receiving. But in the example I just gave, $100,000 net income, $32,000 of tax, $8,000 first quarter, I make my payment on May 17. People are referring to the penalty. It's an interest penalty. What I owe on May 17, if by way of calendar year 21, I have not paid 90% of my income for my taxes for the year, is $20. So it's $8,020 if I make that payment on May 17. $8,000 times 3% for 1 month. So 1/12 times 3% times $8,000. And I actually don't owe that $20 when I make my payment on May 17. There's a true up at the end of the year. And I can qualify. It's not based on just did I do last year's income. Do I have that number? There's 6654 of the code provides 2 alternatives. I will also say that a majority of small business owners that I'm aware of, restaurants and others, are not going to make that $8,000 payment to the Internal Revenue Service. They're going to pay rent, they're going to buy chicken, they're going to buy, whatever it is their business is, and they're going to pay what equivalent would be a 3% interest charge on money that they used in their business as working capital during the year, and the code allows that. It's an interest charge because the taxpayer who gets withholding has withholding out of every single check. So they pay as you go. For people who are 1099 and Schedule C, the pay as you go is you make quarterly payments during the course of the year. If you fail to do so, which many people choose to not make those payments and retain the funds, the $8,000 in my example, at the end, when there's a true-up, when you file your 2021 return, you owe 3% on that. There is not a penalty on the penalty. It is an interest-based penalty.
We're just going to have to move on. We've got additional colleagues. Senator Hassman is next.
We can follow up.
Thank you.
What's that? Yep.
Well,
How are
good
you doing?
afternoon now,
Good to talk to
Commissioner
you.
Reddick. And thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Crapo, for holding this hearing. And Commissioner Reddick, I just want to reiterate what many of my colleagues have said and thank the employees of the IRS who are, as you point out, doing double time, overtime, and really trying to work their way through an enormous amount of work. So we are grateful to them.
We appreciate those comments.
And I really want to emphasize that. I want to start with following up on something Senator Sass was asking you about, which was the employee retention tax credit and the general awareness around it. The December relief package contained bipartisan bill that I worked on with Senator Burr and others to provide the employee retention tax credit to businesses that receive Paycheck Protection Program assistance. The relief package also directed the IRS and Treasury to raise awareness of the tax credit among small businesses. And so you've talked a little bit about some of the things you're doing, but we are still hearing from small businesses and preparers that they don't know much about it. So how can Congress or members of this committee work with you to increase the outreach and the awareness generally?
I think the responsibility is ours to do the outreach, and it's not ours alone. I mean, I appreciate your comments that, for assistance from Congress, but also with respect to, particularly local community groups. Now, the pandemic has put us in touch with more local community groups, churches, social organizations, whatnot, than we ever had access to. So they're now, if you will, on our outreach campaigns and participating. We have folks on the ground. We participate when local organizations have events. We participate on the ground. Could we do better? I believe that we could. Do I have an idea where we're have a deficit? I don't.
So just because my time is limited, my issue is not that you guys aren't doing a lot.
No, I get it.
It's just that what I'm hearing is
what can
people
you do
aren't aware of it, right? So we want our small businesses to be able to use this employee retention tax credit, and we want them to know about it. So let's move on to another question, but this is an invitation from me, and I'm sure other members of the committee would be eager if there are ways that we can partner with all of you. It would be I think in everybody's interest, our constituents' interest, to get it done. I want to turn to the issue of the backlog and unprocessed 2019 tax returns. You have heard a lot about it from members of this committee. I sent you a letter in January urging the IRS to clear the backlog of unprocessed 2019 tax returns, and obviously I've been hearing from constituents, as all my colleagues have. You have discussed in your answer to Senator Portman and others the steps that the IRS is taking to address this backlog. But could you explain how or if IRS is working to mitigate the impact of unprocessed returns on affected taxpayers?
We're doing everything we can to process, which is not the impacts on them. It's actually processing to try to get to the there point sooner. And in terms of mitigation, there was an example given where we issued a CP 59 notice saying, you didn't file your return. That notice was a mistake. Absolutely should not have gone out. I think we issued about 278,000. We found out about that. We notified Congress. We corrected that. We issued corrected notices. So, we do have issues. Those are not mitigation. They're making it worse, right?
Right. I mean, what I'm thinking about is examples of somebody, they can't close an estate. They can't get a mortgage. And if there are ways that the IRS can say, yes, this person has actually filed the return we're processing, something like that would help the taxpayer be able to get on with the rest of their business, right?
Actually, so we have 1.7 million returns in process that came in before January 1. Those, our system is aware of that our system has those returns, which I think is critical. That's not always been the case.
Okay.
And so that would be that. People, we have a lot of avenues for folks, for example, the estate or the mortgage or whatnot. Through the pandemic, we were doing a lot of things for folks in those situations. And if you become aware of that, I would appreciate it. Let our staff work with your staff. We should be able to find those and resolve them.
Okay, thank you. I also want to thank you for acknowledging the impact that the IRS's dependence on legacy IT has had. I've been working to reduce reliance on outdated IT systems at a number of federal agencies, including the IRS. They cost more to maintain than newer systems, while they also deliver worse service. So how would reducing your reliance on outdated IT systems at the IRS help reduce the issues with processing tax returns, prevent future backlogs, and I assume it would save you money over time?
I would assume that many of you probably woke up sometime in the night during 2020 wondering whether we were going to be delivering the next day. Yeah. So one thing will get a lot of people a lot more sleep to have the reliability of our systems. Our systems work, they operate, but unfortunately, we had to build through the years systems on systems on systems, and ultimately the foundation can't hold what we're building on those systems. So the ability for the IRS to be agile, to be nimble, to deliver services, to deliver in the enforcement arena, both internally and externally, is where we're headed. And I think collectively, including members of the committee, I think we all agree it's what the people of this country deserve.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to working with you on that. And I thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll ask you another question about the employee retention tax credit for startups and the guidance coming on the record. Thank you.
I thank my colleague. Senator Warren's next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our tax system is rigged in favor of wealthy individuals and giant corporations that can use lawyers and accountants and lobbyists to avoid paying their fair share in taxes. One problem is the tax code that shields the wealthy and the wealth of ultra millionaires. And I've proposed solutions like a wealth tax to be able to fix that. But the tax code is only part of the problem. Right now, we're not actually enforcing the laws on the books and catching people who fail to pay what they already owe, particularly the ultra rich. The top 1% of Americans account for more than a third of all unpaid federal income tax. And this adds up. Over the next decade, IRS will fail to collect an estimated $7.5 trillion in taxes owed. That's money we're leaving on the table under current law, money that could be invested in childcare, education, a whole bunch of other priorities. So let me ask you, Commissioner Reddick, one of the best tools the IRS has to ensure that people are paying their taxes is to audit them, check their numbers, force them to pay up if they're cheating. But since 2010, audit rates have fallen nearly 60% overall, and they've fallen nearly 80% for taxpayers with more than $10 million in income. Why has the audit rate fallen most sharply for the richest taxpayers?
In the last decade, our enforcement personnel, we've lost 17,000 enforcement personnel. So we have 17,000 fewer people to do exactly what you're asking. And the point is, we actually have 6,500. That's our population that go after the high-income taxpayers, the most egregious cases in the corporate world. So if you were to add 17,000 to 6,500, I think you'd see a reversal in those numbers. We're very hopeful. We feel some momentum, bipartisan momentum for our support if we manage our operations effectively. But also, there's amounts that we can absorb, and we could probably absorb 5,000 to 7,000 per year. We're ramping up our human capital office, but I think it's what people deserve for us to be effective.
Let's not forget, Republicans deliberately targeted the IRS with budget cuts, which depleted its ability to enforce our tax laws. So even as the wealthy and corporations engineer increasingly creative tricks to game the system, the IRS is forced to play catch up with an enforcement staff that's now 30% smaller than it was 10 years ago, and a technology system that is built on computer programming that's nearly 60 years old. It's clear we need a bold investment in the IRS, which President Biden has called for in his infrastructure plan. And Chair Wyden has been a champion for more enforcement funding for years. But the solution isn't just more funding. It's about more stable funding that's targeted toward catching the biggest fish, and that's protected from lobbyists that try to chip away at that funding. Most of the IRS's funding is discretionary, meaning that Congress decides every year how much the agency should get. But this leaves the IRS budget unpredictable and vulnerable to cuts. By contrast, mandatory funding would provide funding on an ongoing basis, ensuring that the IRS has a stream of funds that's steady, that's predictable, that's sustained. Congress has provided this kind of funding for important purposes like preventing fraud in Medicare and Medicaid, So let me ask you, Commissioner Reddick, would additional mandatory funding on top of what the IRS gets through the annual appropriations process, would that kind of mandatory funding strengthen the IRS's ability to go after wealthy tax cheats?
Absolutely. Mandatory, consistent, adequate, multi-year funding allows us to plan appropriately. Every time we go into hiring, we have a concern whether we can actually feed those folks the next year.
Well, I'm glad to hear that this would be helpful because I'm working on legislation to do exactly that. And since one of the biggest ways that the wealthy and that corporations hide their income and avoid paying taxes is by claiming they have much less income than they really do, this legislation would also require more third-party verification of the reported numbers, the same way that wages and interest are already reported to the IRS for the rest of us. Rebuilding the IRS is about making sure that we have a playing field that is level and making sure that we have a government that works for everyone. Thank you, Mr. Reddick, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warren. I know we're going to be working closely together on these issues. So, Commissioner, just a quick comment and where we're going to go from here. I asked you close to 3 hours ago about the tax gap. I thought that the official estimates were just a fraction of what the real tax gap was, and you have delivered this morning, now this afternoon, a jaw-dropping figure of $1 trillion annually. So in the budget window of the United States Congress, we're talking about $10 trillion that doesn't come in to government coffers because of cheaters. That's what this means when you set aside all of the government lingo and the like. And the fact is that nurses and firefighters have to pay with every paycheck, and so many high flyers can get off either using fancy accountants and lawyers to figure out how to avoid paying taxes, and then some just don't pay at all. So that's what we're dealing with here. And what I think was helpful, especially this morning, and by my count, about half of the members of the Finance Committee on both sides of the aisle have asked you about this, reflecting the seriousness of the matter. We have now broken down some of the big areas where taxpayers get fleeced. Crypto global market cap, $2 trillion, foreign source income, illegal source income, the top 1%, either pass-throughs and offshore kind of activity. This is a real blueprint for where you have to go. And a number of my colleagues brought up constructive ideas for getting that money from the cheaters into the government's coffers. The Biden administration has proposed increasing the IRS budget by 10%. I've made it clear, I think that more and particularly targeted enforcement effort is necessary. And, you know, the reality is that we're going to have to, in a 50-50 Senate, have a bipartisan effort. And I've been talking with Senator Crapo about this, and my hope is, on the basis of the number of members who brought this up this morning, we can have an aggressive, proactive effort that reflects the seriousness of this. We have big debates about all kinds of future tax policy. How about telling people that we're really serious about going after the cheaters who are figuring out ways to not pay their taxes when millions of law-abiding, Americans are? So I have paid attention to your comments, especially about how funding for the IRS will yield substantial, like 7-8-fold amounts of revenue collected. I indicated that Senator Crapo and I have talked over the course of the morning about wanting to tackle this in a bipartisan way. I thank you for delivering this important wake-up call to this committee about the enormity of the cheating that is taking place in America with respect to taxes. That's what this morning has really been all about for me. We've got a lot of heavy lifting to do on a variety of issues, but this has been a wake-up call, particularly at a time when Americans are asking what's going to be done to promote more fairness in the tax system. Well, I think we had a pretty good assessment of what the job is all about. So with that, the Finance Committee is going to be adjourned, but Commissioner, know that we are going to be following up, and every year we're going to be asking, when we have this hearing, what has actually been accomplished to reduce the tax gap from the last time this was discussed. And $1 trillion is a big number, and we're going to want to see big results in the next year. With that, the committee is adjourned.